What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the Companions of Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader Ranked, which, believe it or not, is not a video I have made previously. Although it does kind of seem like the thing I would have done by now. Rogue Trader, though, has been on my mind since the release of the recent Lex Imperialis DLC and the announcement of 2 more, and while those 2 upcoming DLC are going to be adding new companions, they are like a full year away still, according to their own timelines, so I figured why not go ahead and talk about this now. A few things to mention up front. For starters, gonna be some spoilers, frankly. I'm not going to spoil everything, but in order to talk about why I do and don't like many of these characters, things like that, it just kind of is necessary that I mention some of these things, and so this video will contain spoilers. You have been warned. What's more, though, an especially interesting thing about Rogue Trader to me is that even a lot of the companions that I actively dislike, I also think actually have really good arcs at times, especially in how they interact with and deal with other members of your party if you actually bring them along. And I'm going to mention that in at least one case upcoming. But if you've never watched a companions ranking video from me, I like to do this by combining 2 aspects of it. How much I like their character and their story, and then a little bit of how actually powerful they are to use. And those 2 things together is in large part how I decide to rank them. So it's not purely a power ranking or anything, but how fun they are to actually play is definitely a factor, and I'm going to talk about that as we go. So I guess the short way of putting it would simply be that these are my opinions, and I am in no way trying to be objective. Last but not least, before we dive into it though, the other thing I wanted to mention is that I am actually leaving 3 companions off of this, and while they aren't exactly a secret anymore, they are generally referred to as like the secret companions you get towards the end of the game, and that is because, spoiler alert, they're all terrible. All 3 of them would be at the bottom of the list because their builds are awful. They don't really have much of a story because you get them right at the end, and they're not fun to play. So if you want to know where I would rank them, the answer is at the bottom of this. And when I inevitably update this video, when the final DLC and updates are out for Rogue Trader, and I, sort of revamp a bunch of content for it like I did with Wrath of the Righteous, I'll probably include them for completeness' sake, but here I don't feel the need to. With that said, though, let's dive fully into this and actually get this show on the road. So, at the very bottom of the barrel, we've got Ulfar, our Space Wolf Space Marine companion. And by being at the bottom of the list, you might think that I actively dislike him in some way, but it's actually kind of the opposite. You see, I have absolutely no remarkable feelings about Ulfar because he's just really, really boring. It doesn't help that you get him a bit later in the game compared to most companions, meaning that you've likely already got your core party kind of figured out. He also, as a Space Marine, takes up a lot of actual room on the battlefield, which for me at least tends to wind up being kind of annoying. His build is fine as a Space Marine. He's a bit bound to certain items as he can only use certain equipment as a Space Marine, being as large as he is. But if you get him all geared out and everything, his build is okay. It's just that, again, at that point, I likely have characters doing a slightly more specialized version of what he comes equipped with. And so while I don't hate Ulfar or anything, he's just kind of there. I don't really have any strong feelings about the guy one way or the other, and thus, in an RPG where hopefully my interactions with these people would make me feel something, he's at the bottom because he makes me feel nothing. Also, I feel like he'd growl at cats, but that's a separate issue, I guess. Coming in at number 11, we've got Marazhai, or Marzipan if you prefer. And while I'm sure some people will be outraged by his placement on this list, my response to that is that I've seen what you guys post on Reddit, and no thank you, frankly. Now, Marazhai is lower on the list because, well, I do think his story is actually pretty interesting, getting to recruit a Drukhari potentially, and then the myriad of different ways you can interact with him, I think definitely has a place in an RPG like this, especially with a rogue trader who are often known to consort with Xenos. But my problem with him is actually twofold. It's just that, rationally, I cannot justify actually taking the guy along because he's just a horrendous monster, as are most of the Drukhari. He's clearly unstable, and he's not going to bring you any help, but rather is going to decimate much of your crew and ship because he literally needs to survive. So already not off to a great start. And then there's the actual combat side of things. His build is okay. He's got some unique stuff that kind of goes into the sort of pain aspect of the Drukhari, but the catch is that, again, you get this guy kind of late, and by this point I've already got more than enough melee fighters for sure. and adding another one on top of that is just deeply uninteresting to me. Put those two things together and you've just got a character that, while he does have some interesting stuff going on, I just never am inclined to actually use the guy. And it's a lot easier to just kill him. Coming in at number 10, though, we then have Idira. So Idira is an odd one because I actually really like some of her story moments, especially later in the game when she conflicts with people like Heinrix if you bring him along. Or at least you might think they conflict, but they actually have a fair few really in-depth conversations about, the differences between a sanctioned and an unsanctioned psyker in a world where an unsanctioned psyker is effectively a ticking time bomb. And it's a really interesting back and forth, but Idira is a bit lower for a couple of reasons. On the story side of things, she's very nonchalant about the threat she poses to other people, especially early in the game. You can, via her story, kind of flip that around and make her take a little more care of what she actually is. But in order to get to that point in her story, you have to be wildly blind to the things she's doing. I mean, just from a pure practicality standpoint, she is a gigantic liability. Even when you take away the grim darkness of the far future, I think she would likely get herself killed in a situation like this purely because of the things she does that invite the chaos she has the potential to spread. And that's before we even start talking about her combat side of things. So Idira, as an unsanctioned psyker, can be built into a powerful character. The issue is, there are other people who can do this better, frankly, or at least just as well, and a bit more directly, via either making your own character a psyker, pumping up Heinrix, or even leaning into somebody like Cassia, can get you a lot of the same stuff. And the thing is, building another character around the sort of psyker idea is probably going to be ideal anyway, because Idira comes with a % chance to just kind of blow up when she uses her powers. Many of her powers come with a slight chance to actually cause more problems than they solve, even beyond what is normal for a regular psyker. She can more easily summon in perils of the warp, that is to say, demons and things. I've had her summon in bloodletters on me in Act 1, which is just a death sentence. That's just an instant reload. Sometimes when she uses her power, she just straight up dies. There's a couple other effects that can happen, and so she's just not a lot of fun to actually play for me. She feels like a wild magic sorcerer, except all the wild magic is bad. Just above Idira, though, we then have Jay. So Jay is a smuggler, a profiteer, a space pirate, if you will, and while I enjoy her personality a lot, her playstyle definitely leaves a lot wanting, because again, it's another case where just a lot of other characters can do what she does better, especially just with Cassia and her navigator and officer powers together. There's just not a lot of reasons to use Jay in actual combat. And then on the story side of things, while I do enjoy the background and everything that she brings to the table, unfortunately, I think some of her companion missions are probably some of the worst there are. And on top of that, while you can, romance her and everything, she has a tendency to take things way too far most of the time, usually at the presumption of you going ahead and doing those things when she has neither asked for permission and you have certainly not given it. Which is to say, she lacks a lot of just basic respect for anybody, even outside the context of what a rogue trader is. Her shenanigans don't usually involve winding up killing everybody on board if it goes wrong, though, and thus she's a little bit higher than Idira is. Which brings me to number 8 with Yrilet. Now, Yrilet is an interesting one because this is a character that I liked a lot, and she's got a pretty good damage build, especially for single target, when you need to do a lot of damage to a single entity really, really quickly. She's very good at that specifically. And being able to do that at ranged even is also really great. Couple that with some support powers, and she's got a decent build that's fun enough to mess around with in combat. But while I like Yrilet's story in the sense that I think she provides a great look into what make the Eldari what they are, unfortunately, to my mind, she betrays you, which results in basically everything going on in Act 3, if you actually let her, as a Xenos, tag along to begin with. And before somebody says it in the comments, yes, I'm aware if you have a conversation with her about it, exactly what happens with the, kidnapping and everything that leads to Act 3 isn't exactly what she had in mind. I don't think that's much of an excuse, because she's either so catastrophically stupid as to lead you all directly into an ambush, or it was willful malice, and frankly, either way, it's not a good look. So for me personally, there's just no way I would work with her after that point, but if you're willing to ignore that, she's perfectly good. and so she's kind of middle of the pack here. Next up, though, we've got Solomourne, one of our recent DLC companions added by Lex Imperialis and a member of the Adeptus Arbites. Solomourne is great if you are leaning fully into like a dogmatic playthrough. He obviously has a bit of friction otherwise, and he also comes with a dog companion, which is obviously going to get everybody's hopes up. But overall, I like Solomourne's story quite a bit. The stuff with the Adeptus Arbites and the Tithe and how that relates back to your dynasty as a rogue trader winds up being really interesting stuff. And given that they had a whole DLC to flesh out that story in comparison to many of the other companions, he actually does feel very present, especially in comparison to like the later ones that join you, like say Ulfar as an example. So there's a really interesting narrative there that is just worth it purely based on that. Which is probably good because his actual build is a little He's fine. I guess the main thing for me is that I would really prefer to build an Adeptus Arbites completely around like shotguns and stuff, and probably try to go a little more damage oriented than the Overseer archetype really lets you be. But in order to bring along his dog companion, Glado, he's got to be an Overseer, and Overseer is more about like, battlefield control and stuff. So it's just, I feel like I could get more out of him if I didn't have to go that route. But like, he's perfectly serviceable in combat. His story is much more what I'm interested in personally, though. Seeing how he does not pose an immediate and potentially catastrophic threat to your life expectancy, however, he's a little higher up on the list. Coming in at number 6, we've got everybody's favorite nun with a gun, Argenta. Argenta's a character with a fun story. She's tied very directly to the main story, and then she's also really fun to play. You can build Argenta in a lot of really, really strong ways that see her just wiping out battlefields. She's got a ton of fun interactions, just all that stuff. A very fun character to actually play. Now, on the story side of things, she's also got a lot going on there because there is the typical stuff, like her very deep attachment to her faith as a sister of battle and everything, and while that's all well and good, what I'm talking about is the more main story related stuff. So slightly more spoilers here than I have done previously, but Argenta is actually the person who murders Theodora in the opening of the game. So apparently Argenta walked in on her doing heresy basically, and sort of gut instinct shot her in the face in what was apparently just a really lucky shot, as it turns out. And that's actually a really interesting interaction if you're playing as like iconoclast or dogmatic, but I will say if you're going full heretic, it doesn't make a ton of sense because she apparently was just so trigger happy she murdered a rogue trader over it. But meanwhile, your heretic rogue trader is doing way worse stuff right in front of her and she never even reacts. And while they try to play into that with like, her being so shocked about what happened to Theodora and everything, it doesn't quite land if you're playing as a heretic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that knocks some points off for me personally, at least. I wish she would be a little more directly confrontational, more quickly, frankly. But otherwise, a great companion. Not the top of the list, though, because next up we've got Heinrix. Heinrix, our resident member of the Inquisition and Psyker extraordinaire. He's got a great story, also tied to the main story, and he's also really fun to play. As a sanctioned psyker, we can buff him up without basically any of the threats that Idira poses, making him an absolute powerhouse in combat. He's great in melee. And then there's his actual story. So, as a member of the Inquisition, he is potentially very interested in whatever you are getting up to, but he's also, of course, subordinate to the big Inquisitor in the area, and that obviously creates some potential tension. But what I really like about Heinrix is actually how all of that plays out. His interactions with these things based on what he believes as a member of the Inquisition. And while Heinrix has a very sort of core set of beliefs, he doesn't always let those beliefs stop him from seeing the whole picture for what it is. And that's the thing I like about him the most. And combine that with the fact that he's probably the most aware of all of your companions about everything that's going on and can see the bigger picture in many of those cases. He makes for a really great companion, even if he is a little bit annoying sometimes. That does bring us to number 4, though, with Pasqal. So, our resident member of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Pasqal has a fantastic story, one of my favorites in the game actually. Naturally, it involves all of the tech priests and everything, and you have to get to the bottom of this strange mystery about a bunch of people who seem to have the same name as he does, and it all culminates in just this really fun, interesting way. But even before all of that, he's also just a lot of fun for me personally to use in combat at the same time, because I often use him as sort of my battlefield control guy. Usually as a grand strategist, I'll let him, set up battlefield zones and stuff, buffing allies, debuffing enemies, and then if you equip him properly, he can also do a fantastic bit of damage with things like plasma rifles and his melee attacks. He's just a great all-around character that really brings a lot to a party, especially with the incredibly limited spots we've got as the companion count continues to increase. And if that wasn't enough, as a tech priest, he's also replaced much of his body with mechanical engineering, and that's pretty metal. That does bring us to number 3, though, and it is none other than Abelard, and for once, I'll announce him. Look, I'll be honest, Abelard is a fantastic character in terms of, gameplay and combat. He is a powerhouse, he's incredibly difficult to kill. You can pretty easily turn him into one of the best melee characters. And while his actual story quests aren't incredibly mind-blowing or anything, what they are, his character interactions with you as a rogue trader, both, building up that initial bit of trust and rapport so he actually starts to respect you as a rogue trader and not just your dynasty's name. And then the fact that he's just ultra supportive and seems to believe in you all the way through makes him just an easy guy to like. And when you combine those things, that's pretty much what he's doing at the top of the list. I don't think I need to really say too much more than that. He's just very easy to like. Coming in at number 2, we then have my Cassia. Cassia is our navigator. She is a very interesting character all the way around. So as, again, a navigator or a type of psyker, she gets a whole host of unique powers that nobody else can use via her navigator abilities, and a lot of those are really, really strong. She gets some massive AoEs, some fantastic buffs, and she is just brutal if you let her be. And that's before you even start talking about her officer class, which of course gives people things like extra moves and stuff. And then on the story side of things, just straight away, her romance is honestly really great, and a decent chunk of why I'm putting her up on the top of the list here. And while I'm not, one who's really big on video game romances, it was honestly just kind of really cute in a weird way that is something that would seem at odds with what Warhammer 40K is all about, but somehow manages to fit quite well in here, especially when it comes to the ending slides and how something like that might realistically play out. But then there's her whole story, which revolves around her navigator house and how, valuable navigators are as the people seeing you through the warp, which allows most of the travel you see. And the Civil War at the center of her navigator house just makes that so much more interesting. And she makes for another character that's just really, really easy to like. Always going to be at the top of the list for me, but not the number 1 spot, because the number 1 spot goes to none other than Kibellah, the DLC companion from Void Shadows. So, Kibellah is basically everything I want to see in a companion. A great story and great gameplay. Now, on the gameplay side of things, maybe a little overboard, to be honest, because the Blade Dancer and the Executioner stuff that they added with Void Shadows as well that she can make use of is just brutally OP. In fact, I think they nerfed it a little bit, but even still, the Pyromancer into Blade Dancer into Executioner and, all the dots and everything that you can trigger via the Executioner archetype, it is just insanely powerful. And you can just wipe screens by pressing a couple buttons when you get everything up and running, and it's just genuinely outrageous what you can do with those builds. Very fun to play. However, her story is also really, really good. Both her actual personal story and how she relates to you and her, Imperial Death Cult that she's a part of, which is kind of sworn to protect you in many cases. And all of that is then kind of told alongside the DLC's main story, Void Shadows, which is incredible itself, and her death cult plays into that quite a bit. And while I could go on for a little bit about it, I think probably the easiest way to say it is that I think Kibellah is realistically some of the best that Rogue Trader has to offer and that Owlcat has written, frankly, which makes it a pretty easy sweep for the number 1 spot. But I think for this video, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. There has been my rankings for Rogue Trader's companions. I certainly hope you enjoyed the list. I'd love to know how you would rank them down in the comment section below, because I'm sure at least a few of you are dying to tell me about how I'm wrong and how you would rank them completely differently. So let's see what you got. That, of course, though, means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.